Hey guys, this is going to be the first of multiple videos called, I think I'm going to be titling this one Apocalypse Soon. Not Apocalypse Now, but Apocalypse Soon. The Greek word apocalypsis is what is translated to Revelation, and that's what I'm going to be going over in the next several videos here. I've broken it up by different sections of Revelation, and the way that I've been studying it, I've decided to basically present the different elements that John highlights throughout the entire book. The book of Revelation is prophetic, but that's an understatement because it looking at all of the Old Testament prophets, their visions of the end of days, they had a like a slice of the pie, so to speak. They had one perspective, one event that they were looking at and talking about. But with Revelation, John was shown pretty much everything that would happen during that last 7 years that we call the tribulation, not only from the world's perspective, but also the events that are happening in heaven at the same time, how those events play out. It's a lot to absorb. It's a lot to try to pick apart. There's a lot of cross references back to the Old Testament in order to understand some of the things he's talking about. I think I'm going to have one video that is specifically about Old Testament references that John makes. There's more to it than that, but that's going to be one area that I'm going to be looking at so that we can kind of understand how major this revelation was to John. So the video today that I'm going to be doing is just going to focus on the 7 seals, the 7 trumpets, and the 7 bowls that are all described in several different chapters of Revelation. It doesn't start until, I believe, Revelation 6 is where the actual seals began to be opened, and the last bowls are poured out, I believe, either Revelation 16 or 17 is where the last bowl is poured out. And there's 5 chapters before, and there's 4 chapters after, 18, 19, 20, 5 chapters after. So the seals, the trumpets, and the bowls are sandwiched in between 5 chapters on each end of them. And there's also parenthetical chapters in between all of those events. So there's a lot to take in. Today I just want to lay the groundwork for what the tribulation is going to be like on earth, essentially, and how the seals, trumpets, and bowls relate to each other. There's multiple different interpretations of the chronology of those events. If they are 7 seals and then 7 trumpets and then 7 bowls, or if there's some sort of mixture and things overlap. I actually have a graphic here. I found this online. Let's see if I can get close enough there so we can see it. Oh no, it's backwards because I have an Android phone. Anyway, the one theory is that they all follow each other. One theory is that you have several of the seals, and then the trumpets begin, and then the bowls begin, but they all finish at the same time. And then another theory is that you have most of the seals, and then most of the trumpets, and then all of the bowls. This one is the one that makes the most sense to me personally. There's that, even that isn't quite the way that I see it. I'm actually going to insert right at this point a mock-up that I have of all of the how they might fit together. So I'm just going to put that right here. If you want to just watch that section to kind of get an idea of what I'm going to be talking about moving forward, and you can even pause it in the middle of that to kind of get a picture for yourself of how it looks. All right, here we have the layout of the seals, trumpets, and bowls. This is kind of a mock-up of what the order might be. So at the beginning here we have seal number 1, it's a white horse, that's the Antichrist. Seal number 2 is a red horse, he brings violence and war. Number 3, the black horse, which is famine. 4 is a pale green horse, which is a combination of death from violence, famine, plagues, and wild animals. Then the 5th seal is a vision of the martyrs up until this point. Not all the martyrs, but the ones up until this point. They're told to wait just a little bit longer. The 6th seal is terror. It's basically a blocking out of the sun, the stars, the moon. Stars fall to earth. It's a very, very big deal. The 7th seal is the intermission. It has a 30-minute silence in heaven, followed by thunder, lightning, and earthquake. The trumpets, number 1, is the basically fire consumes a third of the earth, a third of the trees, and all the green grass. Number 2 is a meteor that hits the seas, and it destroys a third of the animals and a third of the ships. And then an asteroid hits a third of the rivers and springs, turning the waters poisonous or bitter. And then the sun, moon, and stars lose a third of their light. The 5th trumpet is the release of the demonic locusts from the abyss, as well as Apollyon. The 6th trumpet is a 200 million man mounted army that brings death by fire, smoke, and sulfur. The 7th trumpet, there's praise in heaven, as well as thunder, lightning, earthquakes, and hail. And then lastly, we have the bowls. The first bowl is the sores on the people who have taken the mark of the beast. The second bowl is all the seas become as blood, and all the creatures in the seas die. And then the same happens to the rivers in the third bowl. The 4th bowl, the sun is turned into a scorching death ball, and it scorches man. The 5th bowl, the throne of the beast is cast into darkness. That's a spiritual darkness. The 6th bowl, the Euphrates River, releases it's dried up to make way for the kings of the earth from the east, as well as 3 unclean spirits sent out. And then finally, the 7th bowl is poured out on the air, and there's thunder, lightning, and earthquake, and hail. So again, that's the layout for everything. So I'm going to go over all of that in this video. So now that we have that sort of layout set out there, I want to go through each of the seals and the trumpets and the bowls in the order that I just described in the layout there. Not necessarily the order, because I went through 7, 7, 7, but I'm going to talk about the way that it was laid out and what that means, how it makes sense. All right. So with the first seal, again, sorry, this is backwards because I have an Android phone. The first seal is the white horse, and that is the horseman that's described on that white horse is an imitation of Jesus, who is a white horse rider at the end of Revelation. I believe it's in Revelation 19 is when he actually comes back with us, with the church, for the Battle of Armageddon. And he has a word from his mouth, a sharp two-edged sword from his mouth that is the word of God, and that's what he defeats the enemies with. And this white rider has a bow with no arrows, and the bow is a symbol of a covenant, just like the rainbow is the covenant that God made with us, that he would never destroy the earth by flood again. It's a linking of two parties, like a bridge. There's lots of symbolism there, but because he has a bow with no arrows, yet he goes out to conquer, he's going to be conquering the world with diplomacy, with peace. And he is the Antichrist. He's the person that the world will be looking for when there is chaos due to the pre-tribulation rapture. They will be looking for someone to make sense of everything. And it says that he is given a crown, And that's the world choosing him as their new de facto savior and leader, which he's going to eat up because he is essentially an imitation of Jesus. He's probably going to be speaking about peace and love, and he may even use parables to make his points, all similarities to Jesus, but ultimately it's a false peace. It does say back in Daniel 9:27 that he, that is the prince that is to come, that the Antichrist will confirm a covenant with many. And the word that it uses there for confirm is to strengthen or to enhance. It's not just like signing a covenant or a treaty, it's enhancing one that's already in place. And again, the people are going to want this person to be their leader because he's going to say all of the right things. Let's see here. Now, this period of peace that he brings, the reason I had it laid out the way that I did, it's not going to be a lasting peace. It will be something that is worldwide for a time, but essentially there's still going to be the underlying, the bubbling up of violence in people in different nations. They're trying to maintain the peace because of the chaos, but eventually they fall back into their normal way of doing things. And that's where the second seal comes in. That's the red horse rider. The word for red that's used here is only ever used one other time, and that's to describe the red dragon in the Revelation 12, which I'll be covering that in another video as well. It's just interesting that this particular type of red, which is like a fiery red, is used to describe this horse as well as the dragon. The war that he brings is more of an anti-peace, and the word that it used for him taking away peace, that peace is the peace of mind. Essentially, people being willing to settle differences and to not take things to a violent level, that gets taken away by the red horse. So you'll have nations going to war with each other, but you will also have people becoming radically violent and killing each other just over the simplest little things, like almost like a feudalism sort of situation there. Again, this is going to lead to widespread violence, not just war. That leads to the next seal, logically, which I'll get to in just a second here. And I just want to interject here a little reminder. The events that are happening to this point in the tribulation are still feasibly man-made events, right? So the world is going to see these things happening and still be thinking that these are man's problems. These are the issues that they can solve, that they should deal with. And it's not going to be supernatural. It's going to be like things are now with wars and rumors of wars and all the madness that's in the world. It's going to be worse, but it's still going to be in the people's mind something that is solvable through their false savior, right? So the Antichrist is still in some form of power, and the people will still be looking to him for a solution to these worldly man-made problems, right? Let's move on to the next one. I lost my train of thought there. There's another point that I wanted to make. It'll probably come back to me in a little bit, but the next one is the black horse. That's the third seal. And the rider of this horse is holding, your translations are going to say he's holding scales, like measuring scales, right? But the word that's used for the scales that he's holding is the same word that's used for a yoke, as in something that divides labor. I'm going to have a note here. I just want to write in, if I can find it, Matthew chapter 11, verses 29 and 30. Let me find that here. Where Jesus says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." All right. So that yoke that he's talking about there is the same exact Greek word that's used to describe the scales that are held by the black horse rider. And so to me, while it is a measurement tool for pricing things out because he brings famine, it's also a tool for dividing labor. So you could see something similar to almost a communism type of proposal being put forward, redistribution of food and wealth and labor. That ties in with the imagery of a yoke there. But it specifically says that you're going to need a day's wages for basically a loaf of bread, a day's wages for barley. But then it says, don't hurt the wine or the oil. And the word hurt there just has to do with essentially damaging them in a way that they become expensive, the way that the grains are expensive. So this is an indication that not everything will be affected by the famine, but the primary source of calories for people in the world today are grains. So if the grains are affected, then that will produce famine. The sort of inference that you can make from that is that either the time that this is taking place or the location that it's taking place will be an area or a time of harvest for those grains. I think it's a combination of both. I think that it's going to be a long-term famine that's affecting people in general. Obviously, you're not going to have everybody in the world starve to death, because then the rest of the events couldn't happen. But it'll be a substantial enough famine, and it will be felt as a result of the grain becoming inaccessible and more expensive. And that also ties into inflation, which will move people towards, adjusting currencies. These are all things that lead up to the next events, right? So the combination of war and famine lead to malnourishment, and then that logically takes us to the next seal, which is the pale green horse. Now, the word that's used for pale green is chloros. That's a Greek word. It literally means pale green. It's where we get our word chlorine. And if you've ever had your hair turn that icky greenish blondish color because you were in a pool that had too much chlorine in it, that's essentially the color that this horse is. Now the rider is called Death. And it's the Greek word for death there is thanatos, not Thanos, thanatos, and it's capitalized as in a proper noun. So this rider is literally the embodiment of death. And he's followed by Hades, which isn't hell. Hades is the unseen realm where it's called the abode of the spirits, abode of the departed spirits. Sorry. So when people die, it's kind of like a little holding place for people that die. And it says that a fourth of the world dies and then goes directly to Hades. That's the reason that Hades is following behind death, right? The things that they die from are war, famine, plagues, and wild beast. Now it doesn't say plagues in the actual verse in Revelation where it's describing these things. It says death, thanatos, capital T. But it's a reference to a verse in Ezekiel 14:21. Let me see if I can find that in here. All right. Ezekiel 14:21. There we go. It says, how much worse will it be when this is God speaking, how much worse will it be when I send against Jerusalem my 4 dire judgments? The sword, which is war, famine, wild beast, and plague. And the Hebrew for plague here is wadiber, which means pestilence or plague. And then continuing that verse, it says, in order to cut off from it both man and beast. So the word beast is in there twice, but it's a different Hebrew word in both cases. And the word wild, before wild beast, it means evil. It could be something like a rabid animals. And the word for beast there is just describing a living creature, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be like a dog on the street, a rabid dog. It could be. It could also be wild animals. But it's different than the other word that she said for beast there, which is more like domesticated animals. And it translates to cattle specifically. So the idea is that John is referencing Ezekiel with that he's being shown the reference to Ezekiel with that description of the fourth horseman. So you have already war and famine. Now you have plagues, pestilence because of malnourishment, because of just uncleanness in general. And then on top of all of that, you have these wild animals that are going to be attacking people. Those first four, all right, those are man-made, manageable. I don't know how to describe it. They're not supernatural in the world's eyes. The magnitude at which they will be supernatural, but the events themselves will be seen as something that needs to be fixed by their Antichrist. All right. Up until that point, it's all going to be okay, I'm managing it. I'm dealing with these guys. I'm dealing with those guys. I'm the good guy. I'm going to fix everything. That's how the Antichrist is going to be handling this stuff publicly, right? From there, we move to, I'm going to put in the first four trumpets at this point, because this is where it starts to get real. It starts to get a little bit more of nature in the people's eyes. It'll be a nature problem instead of a man problem. But we know that it's supernatural because God is using these things to move people to where they make a decision. And we'll get to that in a little bit as well. First trumpet is earth, all right? And it says that hail and fire and blood will rain down and essentially burn up a third of the earth, a third of the trees, and all the green grass. So this is the point where, if let's say that you've been a homesteader, a prepper, whatever, you've been growing your own food, this is where that's going to start to become less and less of an option, because you're now having natural disasters that are affecting your ability to do that. And again, that's nudging people towards making a decision. All right. So the trumpets feel more like an overt display that these things are happening from God, as opposed to man's gone crazy. You have nature is starting to go crazy. So it's a little bit more of a heads up to the people that are on the earth at this point. All right. In fact, by the end of the trumpet judgments, everybody is saying, these things are from God, but they still refuse to repent. The ones that are highlighted still refuse to repent. All right. So that's all I got for that one. It's a push towards the beast system. Yep. Number 2 is the sea. The second trumpet affects the sea. There's a mountain that falls from the sky that's on fire. Essentially, it's a meteor. And again, it's unclear if all of these first 4 trumpets happen simultaneously or back to back to back, or if there's a space between them. I'm reading it as God using specific things that are each a different element, not necessarily an element like wind, fire, or water, or earth, but he's kind of doing that on a spiritual level, right? And I'll explain that here in just a little bit. In any case, they are happening in order, right? And it's going to drive people to decide between Jesus and the people that are still there, that are becoming more and more aware, are going to have to make a choice between Jesus and the Antichrist as to who can supply their needs. All right. So with this one, with the mountain that falls into the sea, you have a third of the sea that is turned to blood, and a third of the creatures and ships are destroyed within it. All right. So that represents food and travel, right? So the sea is the way that you would travel from place to place. And the sea is full of creatures that we can eat. So if some of that is being cut off, then it's pushing people more and more towards that decision point, right? The next one is the rivers. It's called wormwood. It's an aster. In Greek, the word aster is used to describe it. That's where we get asteroid from. Now it's going to fall into the atmosphere, and most likely there's some sort of a shatter and scatter that goes on, and it's going to affect a third of all the freshwater sources, and it's going to turn them bitter as wormwood oil, which is poisonous. And it says that many people, not a fraction, a third or a fourth, it just says many people will die from drinking this water. right? Number 4 is the lights, which is the sun, the moon, and the stars. And again, guys, I'm really sorry that it's backwards, but I can read, you can read. The parts that I'm reading on the back of the notes here are the parts that are important for you. So it says that day and night will lose a third of their light. Just speculation here. I got to give you a big old disclaimer that speculation that there could be dust in the atmosphere from the impacts of the 2 previous stones falling to the earth. That would be similar to a nuclear winter. This dust cloud is traveling across the earth. You've got a third of the earth at any given point in time is in darkness. So that would cause a third of the night and the day to be without light. Another possibility is that there is an actual nuclear winter. You could have nuclear war at any point in here, and that could be causing, dust to be in the atmosphere. In either case, we have an actual event, the previous 2 trumpets, that makes sense to have put something into the atmosphere that can block out the light. That's just speculation on my part, but it makes sense, right? So, just to highlight the first 4 trumpets really quickly, the source of the event ties to the effects of the event on a spiritual or physical level, right? So the first one is from the atmosphere. You had hail, fire, and blood from the atmosphere raining down, right? And that affected the plants of the earth. That's seasonal food, right? It's not daily food, it's seasonal food. So that step 1 is to affect people's ability to plan and grow long term. Step 2, with the fiery mountain, that affected the sea, which is daily food, and as well as like transportation, commerce, travel being diminished because of the sea being turned to blood, the creatures in the ships being destroyed, right? So we've got long-term food, daily food. The next thing with the asteroid is fresh water. Now, fresh water is something that you can't go without as long as you can go without food. So it's a more direct impact on the people. All right, let's see how it's progressing there. All right, and then finally you have the lights being affected. And again, all of these is just a third is being diminished. All right, with the light, you have a third of the light being diminished, and that essentially is a spiritual life. We are the light of the world. Jesus is the bright morning star. The light is what gives us life. Essentially, turning a third of that into darkness is taking away the very source of our life, right? So we went from seasonal food, daily water, to the source of life, essentially. I guess it's a metaphorical or a figurative illustration of how serious things are getting as we move through each of the trumpets there. All right. So, meanwhile, you have the 5th seal, which shows the martyrs in heaven. All right. This isn't something that you're going to see on earth, obviously, during the tribulation, but this is a vision that was shown to John to show how things are progressing. When he sees the 5th seal be opened, he's shown the martyrs underneath the altar in heaven, right? And these are all martyrs who have been martyred up until this point. Up until this point in the tribulation, those martyrs are in heaven, but under the altar. This is a symbolic imagery, basically. And they are asking, when, O Lord, will you avenge our deaths, right? So what happens after they ask that question? They're given white robes, and they're told to wait a little time, right, until the rest of the martyrs arrive. So this is showing John that you have all of these martyrs through history up until this point, and now you're almost home. You're almost there. You've got just a small amount of time until the rest of the martyrs will arrive with you, right? So the Greek word that's used for a little time there is micron, as in microscope or a micrometer. It's a tiny, teensy-weensy amount of time, and it's giving the indication that at this point, you're going to have the rest of the martyrs are about to come in. And that's when you're going to have the system of the beast, the persecution of the Christians, the chasing out the Jewish people from Israel. All of those things are about to happen at this point. All right? Excuse me. It's just a heads up that the new believers on earth are about to be portrayed as the troublemakers, spreaders of disease, and spreaders of disinformation. I was shown that essentially that there's been, and I'm going to do a video on this as well, there's been dress rehearsals throughout history for these types of events. And the people that become the targets are always labeled as basically troublemakers and spreaders of disease. And now we have people who are spreading lies and disinformation. All right. This will lead to the persecution and death of those people. All right. And as well, it will lead to the beast system. Right. So that's why the fifth seal is, I place it at that point in my little graphic there. Right. So directly to the right of the first four trumpets, I place the first four bowls, because they are essentially affecting the same things to a greater magnitude, right? So bowl number one, you have the sores that are on the people who receive the mark of the beast. So for sure, the bowls will start after the beast system has been fully implemented and people have chosen to take the mark. So it's not immediately after the first four trumpets, but it's like the, I don't want to say the encore, but it's probably the best way to describe it. It's the fulfillment completely of what was done in 1/3 on the first four trumpets you're going to have for the first four bowls, right? So that's basically what I've got in my notes there. I just said it from memory. By this time, everyone who is still alive has made their choice and declared their loyalty either to Jesus or to the beast, all right? The first bowl is in physical sores on those who swore loyalty to the beast. This is a punishment for the government system as well as the pride of life. Now, the pride of life is in a sense of loving the world, the things of the world, right? And also longing for this present life to be prolonged. Imagine that people search for immortality. They want to live in this world, for whatever reason, forever, as opposed to the glory of heaven forever, right? That's the pride of life. And this is why you'll see later on, from some of the things that they're suffering, they're not allowed to die. And I'll go over that as well. Enter the second bowl, which again affects the sea. Now, in this time, the entire sea is turned to blood. Every living thing in the sea dies. And again, the seas represent commerce and travel, as well as the daily food, but commerce and travel is the main thing that's going to be affected by this. These things completely shut down, and it's a shutdown of the lust of the eyes. Now you have the pride of life, which was just enjoying and wanting the worldly things, and this is the lust of the eyes, which is wanting physical things or places. So that's commerce and travel is going to be shut down completely by this, right? Then next we have, again, the rivers for the third bowl. All fresh water is going to be turned to blood. It's a source of physical life. These rivers being turned to blood is a spiritual punishment and a reminder that the water of the world will never fully satisfy. And Jesus says that he is the water that will never run dry. You'll never thirst again from him. All right. But it's also symbolic of the lust of the flesh, which is in an internal sense, physical desires, what we traditionally think of as lust, like sexual attraction. There's going to be a lot of that rampant in the world during that time. It's just moving down the line of the spiritual equivalents of the physical things that were already addressed with the trumpets. And then finally we have the sun for the fourth bowl. It is made to scorch people. I believe it's Revelation 16, 8, and 9. This bowl is poured out on the sun, and it's given the power to burn and scorch mankind. All right. So if the sores from the first bowl weren't enough for taking the mark, this will make people lose their own outward beauty. All right. So it shows the fact that the sun has the power to give growth and life, but also to burn and destroy it, right? And this is going to affect people's lust for their own flesh, essentially how they think of themselves. And, if they think they're hot stuff, they're about to become hot stuff. That's what this bowl is all about. All right. So again, just like with the trumpets, I'm going to summarize all four, where they come from, what they're aimed at. All right. So for the first bowl, it was aimed at the government or the world. That is the pride of life and people wanting to be in the world forever. All right. The second bowl is the seas. That's travel and commerce. That's the lust of the eyes, things and places. The rivers for internal life. That's physical lust, basically what we think of as sexual lust. And then the sun is external life, our physical narcissism, whatever you want to call it, or thinking highly of ourselves. And that's self-love. And those last two together are the lusts of the flesh. Right? So again, the bowls don't necessarily happen directly after the first four trumpets, but they do line up on a physical and partial to a spiritual and full, as far as the punishments and judgments that are being laid out. Right? They could happen relatively close to each other, but it is up in the air as far as how close. In the meantime, you have number 6 on the seals. This is called the terror. All right. Now, this is one of the few times that there's an earthquake that is identified in all of the things that is outside of the seventh seal, the seventh trumpet, the seventh bowl. Those all have an earthquake in them. That's why I think they line up. This is one time that there is an earthquake, and the sun is turned black, the moon is turned red, the stars are falling from the sky, as well as the sky being rolled up like a scroll and mountains being leveled. So, mountains are leveled, islands are cast away. This sounds a lot like, the earth being reshaped, basically. It could be fully supernatural. It could be the earthquake is so strong, it's going to level all the mountains, the islands are going to disappear. That could be. It could also be nuclear war, where you have just all-out battles with people, and the earthquake happens, the sun is blackened, the moon is red. Those things are possible as a result of the nuclear winter. It could also be a combination of both. Personally, I lean more towards both. I do believe there will be multiple different earthquakes that are of high magnitude during the entire tribulation. The ones at the ends of the sevens are special, right? But at this point, when terror is going on, it says that everyone is going to hide in the caves and the rocks. The Greek word for the rocks there is petra, which it's more like bedrock or a cliff or a mountain. It's not a boulder, like it's a native part of the core rock, right? So this could be literally hiding in caves or bunkers dug out of the earth. Probably a mix. You might have people who are just, they don't have bunkers, but they know that they can go hide in the caves. You also have some elites who might have some bunkers that they can shelter in as a result of all of this. Now, at this point, there is a break. There's a break in the description of the seals, and it's the angels going out to say, hold up, before you do the last one. We want to make sure that we have the 144,000 Jewish witnesses sealed up, and these should be being protected in the wilderness by this point. Then we're also shown a great multitude in heaven, and these are in front of the throne. They're no longer under the altar. They're in front of the throne, and it says they're from every tribe, tongue, and nation. So these are the martyrs in completion at this point. So this is everybody that was killed up until that point when the fifth seal was opened, as well as the rest of the people who were martyred during the tribulation. Now, that's probably going to be pretty much 99% of the people who are Christians, and they're not being protected in the wilderness. Now, the Jewish people who are protected in the wilderness are going to include the 144,000 witnesses who are going to be witnessing to the Jewish people. There may be some of the other Christians who are there in the wilderness with them, but more likely you're going to have most of the Christian Gentiles who aren't Jewish people dead by this point. And that's why the martyrs are complete. The number is complete. All right. All right. So at this point, we're very, 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 very near the end of all of it. All right. So the martyrs completed. They have their white robes on. They're essentially getting ready for battle. Right. Now we have the fifth trumpet, which is titled "At the Abyss." This is where there's an angel from heaven that goes down and opens up the key to the bottomless pit. He unleashes these demonic locusts. There's also a destroyer, Abaddon, Apollyon, who is released along to lead the locusts. There's very, very figurative language that's used to describe them. It could literally be giant locusts with stinging tails like scorpions who go out to torment people for 5 months. It literally could be that. It could also be more that that's transitioning to the spiritual realm at this point. With the rest of the events that happen, there's a heavy emphasis on spirituality, demonic war, the things that are affecting the people that are still around. Because everybody that's left at this point is pretty much on board with the beast. So it's God essentially allowing them to be afflicted completely so that they are 100% sure that they're on board with the beast, with the Antichrist, for when the battle that's coming comes. All right? This is the last 5 months. Yes. Okay, so for this particular one, with the locust, the demonic locust, it's described as lasting 5 months. Now, it doesn't mean that this is the only thing that's going to happen for 5 months. It just says that this period of time, this particular trumpet judgment, will last 5 months. Now, some of the other things could happen towards the tail end or almost simultaneously. It just makes sure to let us know that this will happen for at least 5 months before the end of everything. This will begin, right? All right. The next one I had on there was the fifth bowl, which is the throne of the beast being cast into darkness. All right. And the implication there is the throne of the beast essentially is his entire kingdom, which is the world at this point, except for the Jewish people being protected in the wilderness. And it's a moral or spiritual darkness. Essentially, this period of time, this fifth bowl, is going to blind spiritually all the people that are in the world. They cannot see their own sin, but instead they are going to be cursing and blaming God for all of the things that are happening. From this point on, they do not see themselves as the ones who are at fault for any of this. There is no going back for them. There's no repenting because they are in spiritual darkness. That's what this bowl is all about. All right. All right. So all the remaining population, again, except for the ones who are in the wilderness being protected divinely, are fully against God by that time. Next up, we have the sixth trumpet. This is, it has the 4 angels who were bound at the river Euphrates for this time, is like this day, hour, month, like it literally like this moment in time. They've been waiting for this to happen. They're going to be released. All right. They are going to be essentially releasing a 200 million man mounted army. And John says that he heard that that was the number. He didn't actually count them because when he's up in heaven and he sees this multitude of martyrs and Christians, everybody standing before the throne, he says you can't count them. But this number is 200 million, right? And they're going to go out and kill a third of mankind with fire, smoke, and sulfur. And you're thinking, well, if they're already on board with the beast, why do they need to be killed? It's essentially a culling of them and a re-solidification of their mentality that this is happening to them. They're the victims here. And it's just going to further entrench them into the army of the beast. All right. That's it. And again, the angels come out of the river Euphrates, and then you have the sixth bowl, which is the Euphrates is dried up so that the kings from the east, which I'll talk about in a second, are going to be able to cross over it. And then you also have the three unclean spirits. All right. So when it says that the Euphrates is dried up to prepare the way, it means to make a path for the kings of the east. So you're going to have all of the world essentially converging onto the place that is called Armageddon. It's Megiddo in the Hebrew. That's where the final battle will take place. The Battle of Armageddon. Armageddon describes a location. It's not a state of being or a state of mind. It's the place where all of these kings are going to be traveling to. That is why the river Euphrates will be dried up so that they can get to that place. All right. So at the same time, you're going to have three unclean spirits that look like a frog that are released from the mouths of the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. So the unclean spirit released from the dragon represents the spirituality of the world, the unseen spirituality of the world. The spirit from the mouth of the beast represents the kingdom of the world, the actual government, the structure of the world. And then the spirit from the false prophet represents the religion of the world, the worship of the world. At that point, there's going to be a false religion. It's going to be a world religion that's tied to the government, which is led by the Antichrist, who is possessed by the dragon. They're all going to be tied together, but it's an illustration of those three elements all being unified by these three unclean spirits, right? And so that's all kings and all people who are still alive on the world are converging. They're being pulled by these unclean spirits to converge on that place, which is Armageddon. All right. Now, the stage is finally set for the final battle of the tribulation. That's everything that's happened up to that point has pushed people to make a decision. It gave them a last-ditch chance with the first four trumpets. It was like, okay, I'm going to take away a third of everything to show you that this is real, and I'm going to make you make a choice. All right? Are you going to choose Jesus as your Savior because you know that these things are happening? Or are you going to choose the Antichrist because supposedly he can solve all of your problems? And that's what the first four trumpets were all about. Then once we got past that, pretty much everybody's already made their choices, so we're going to shut everything off with the first four bowls. And all of that stuff was pushing people. Make a choice. Now you've made a choice. We're going to form alliances. And everybody is moved to that place, Armageddon, for that final battle. That's what the seven are all about, right? The seventh seal, the seventh trumpet, and the seventh bowl, in my mind, are all describing the same series of events from a different perspective. The best illustration that I could come up for this was a championship sports game, right? Like the Super Bowl, all right? You have offense, you have defense, you have the coach, you have the quarterback, you have the announcers, you've got the fans. All those are different perspectives. But the game, the Battle of Armageddon, the Super Bowl, is the event that everybody is looking at from different perspectives, all right? So, in heaven, from the heavenly perspective, for the seventh seal, you have a 30-minute period of silence. In that silence, you have the prayers of the saints, and that's everybody at that point who has believed on Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior is in heaven. And there's some of them that are down still on earth. The Messianic Jews at that point who are in protection, they're going to be also praying. All of those prayers from the people who are on earth and still being protected and the people who are in heaven are being lifted up. All right? We only have this perspective because of the seals. It's not in the other. It's not in the seventh trumpet. It's not in the seventh bowl. The seal is showing us a perspective of heaven. So you have this 30-minute pre-game prayer that's happening. All right? It's in the locker room. The battle hasn't started yet. We're going to have a 30-minute prayer before we go out. All right? And the kickoff for the game is when the angel takes the fire from the altar and casts it down onto earth. Now, from heaven's perspective, he's casting down fire from the altar. From the other perspectives, it's a hailstorm. All right? That's why the seal, the seventh seal, has thunder, lightning, earthquake, and the casting down from the altar onto earth. Now, that part about the casting down from the altar being the hailstorm, speculation on my part. I want to make sure that I am clear about that. That again makes sense to me given the perspective that we have here. We're in heaven for this particular perspective. So we see the fire being cast down, not as hailstones, but as fire from the altar in heaven with all the smoke and the prayers of the saints. All right? For the second perspective, for the seventh trumpet, there is praise in heaven. They're rooting for the home team. This is the stands, the people who are cheering in the stands. They're not actually on the field playing. That's why you don't have the 30-minute prayer, the pregame prayer that wasn't a locker room. This is the stands, all right? The spoiler is they already know who wins, all right? So then you have thunder, lightning, earthquake, and hail, right? From the fans' perspective, right? And then lastly, you have the bowl onto the air, and this is the perspective that shows the playing field, the battle, the game, the football game, the championship game is the perspective of the playing field, right? And again, this is all kickoff, right? This is the kickoff. We have the locker room perspective, the heavenly perspective, then we have the stands perspective, now we have the perspective of kickoff on the field, all right? So we see the thunder, the lightning, the earthquake, the hail, as well as the impacts of those things on the land. And then it shows the fall of Babylon, right? The impact being like it talks about how the great city was split. The actual hailstones are 100 pounds. Like it's more descriptive as far as the impact. The people curse God because of the judgment of the hailstones. Like all of that stuff is on the field. We had the fans in the stands. We had the coaches and the players having their pregame prayer. And it's all just different perspectives of the same events, right? So the next few chapters, they detail some parenthetical events, which I'll cover in another video. But then after that, we come back to the aftermath of the sevens, of the seventh seal, the seventh trumpet, and the seventh bowl in chapter 19, with Jesus and us, his armies, riding in on white horses, the real white horses, to defeat the beast, the false prophet, and the kings of the earth. Again, that battle of Armageddon is over like that. But all the people of the earth gathered for it. The armies of heaven gathered for it. When kickoff happens, then you have the actual game take place. The game of eternity taking place. It's over in a second because the word of God comes out of Jesus' mouth and it destroys his enemies, right? And then they take the beast and the false prophet and they cast them into the lake of fire. And then Satan is bound up for 1,000 years. We'll cover that on another video as well. But these are the events that are going to happen during the tribulation. It starts out with man-manageable events. It goes to Mother Nature events that are somewhat manageable. They're profound. Even the man-made ones are profound. And then the nature ones that start out with a third of this, a third of that, a third of this, it gets gradually more and more intense until finally everything is wiped out. You've already made your decision by that point, so we're just going to clear everything off. And then you have the armies of heaven and the armies of the world getting ready for battle. And then you have the battle and it's over. That's the progression of events in the tribulation. That's why the graphic that I have for the way I laid out the scrolls, the seals and the trumpets and the bowls makes the most sense as far as this is a man event, this is a nature event, this is a supernatural event, this is the culmination of everything. Now again, this is my point of view. on how these events tie together. I'm not a biblical scholar, theologian, or eschatological expert. This is how I have been interpreting as I've been studying and reading. In my next few videos, I'm going to be talking about the system of the beast and what will lead up to that. I'm also going to be talking about the dress rehearsals that Satan has tried to do in the past and how these show that he's basically just been making sure that these things will go the way that he wants them to go when it's time to actually do it. There's probably a couple more in there. This one is a little bit longer than I expected it to be, but I really enjoyed going through it with you guys. If you have any questions, or if you want to, throw in your opinion on how these events are going to play out, put it in the comments below. Otherwise, I'll see you soon. Maranatha.